The Galactic Concord, a sprawling alliance of species that had long since outgrown war in favor of ponderous bureaucracy and endless trade negotiations, generally regarded humanity as a rather loud, excitable, and ultimately harmless addition to their ranks. Humans were newcomers, barely a few centuries into their interstellar journey. Their technology was adequate, if a little unrefined, and their enthusiasm for joining every galactic committee was noted with a kind of weary amusement by the older, more staid races. What truly baffled and often elicited polite, multi-jointed shrugs was humanity's profound dedication to things the conquered deemed frivolous. Chief among these was their obsession with art and storytelling. The Zalarians, with their crystalline thought matrices, found human narratives illogical and inefficient. The ponderous, gas-giant-dwelling oracles of Volo considered them too fleeting, lacking the gravitas of millennial-long atmospheric poetry. To most, human stories were quaint distractions, like the colorful baubles a child might cherish, endearing, but of no real galactic consequence. The flagship of this perceived frivolity was the Mnemosyne, a colossal human archive ship. It wasn't a warship, nor a primary trade vessel. It carried, quite literally, stories, trillions of them, from ancient oral traditions painstakingly reconstructed to the latest hyperimmersive interactive sagas. Music, paintings, sculptures, holovids, games, poems, jokes, the entire messy, vibrant tapestry of human creative output. Most conquered species simply catalogued its existence and moved on to more important matters, like the fluctuating price of xenon-4 isotopes. Then came the silence. It wasn't a true silence, not an absence of sound, but an absence of cohesion. It began subtly, a whisper in the subspace channels, a fleeting shadow at the edge of perception. Then it grew, a mind-altering signal, an ancient, insidious mimetic plague of unknown origin started to propagate across the galaxy. It didn't kill. It didn't destroy ships or planets in overt ways. It unraveled minds. It sowed discord, paranoia, and irrational terror. Trust eroded. Alliances fractured. Logical species found themselves crippled by indecision and baseless suspicion. Aggressive species turned on themselves. Communication became a minefield of misinterpreted intentions and escalating fear. The conquered, built on centuries of careful diplomacy, began to crumble from within. Panic was a virus, and the silence was its perfect vector. Amidst this rising chaos, a militant faction known as the Vorkath Ascendancy saw opportunity. The Vorkath, a species known for their brutal pragmatism and desire for dominance, had long chafed under conquered regulations. They believed themselves immune to the silence, their minds too disciplined, their purpose too singular. They began a series of daring raids, attempting to consolidate power while the rest of the galaxy was mentally hamstrung. One of their targets, chosen more for its symbolic value of striking at a soft, conquered member than for any strategic gain, was the human archive ship Mnemosyne. They saw it as a treasure trove of data, perhaps containing some overlooked technological secret, or at the very least, information to be twisted for propaganda. The Vorkath commander, Gruul, anticipated an easy capture of what he called humanity's museum of nonsense. The Mnemosyne, under the command of Captain Eva Rostova, was a civilian vessel, its crew primarily archivists, librarians, curators, and a surprisingly large number of musicians and actors for cultural attaché duties. They had minimal defenses. When the Vorkath warships dropped out of hyperspace, sleek and menacing, their intentions were brutally clear. Aboard the Vorkath flagship, Iron Will, Gruul watched the Mnemosyne on his main view screen. "They are hailing us, Commander," a Vorkath lieutenant reported, its voice a guttural rasp. "Offering surrender. Pathetic." Gruul's mandibles clicked in satisfaction. "Inform them their surrender is accepted under the condition of full systems access. We will board and catalog their trinkets. Perhaps we can find something to amuse us while the galaxy eats itself," he sneered. "Their precious stories won't save them now." The Vorkath boarding parties, clad in heavy armor, stormed the Mnemosyne. They expected resistance, perhaps a futile gesture of defiance. Instead, they found the human crew surprisingly calm, if apprehensive. Captain Rostova met them in the primary docking bay. "We are unarmed," she stated, her voice steady despite the Vorkath weapons trained on her. "The ship and its archives are yours. We only request humane treatment for the crew." Gruel, observing Viri's lieutenant's helmet cam, felt a pang of disappointment at the lack of struggle. "Secure them. I want their central data core. Let's see if these human stories have any actual value. Perhaps their primitive fictions contain some novel psychological warfare techniques we can adapt." The Vorkath technicians, efficient and brutal, tore into the Namasani systems. They bypassed the human security protocols with ease, their primary goal being the central archive, a vast, crystalline matrix humming with stored information. One particularly ambitious Vorkath tech leader, Zorg, was tasked with sifting through the initial data streams, looking for anything that could be weaponized against the Vorkath's rivals, or even better, something to amplify the effects of the silence for targeted populations. Zorg connected his neural interface to the human archive core. He was prepared for a deluge of information. He was not prepared for what that information was. He wasn't just accessing data, he was experiencing it. A wave of raw, unfiltered human experience washed over him. Not just facts and figures, but emotions, perspectives, narratives woven with such intricate complexity that his Vorkath mind, used to direct, literal information, recoiled. He saw a flickering cave painting of a hunt, felt the primal fear and triumph of the ancient human artist. He heard a symphony, and for a moment understood the alien concept of sorrowful beauty. He was a knight defending a hopeless siege, a scientist making a breakthrough discovery against all odds, a child hearing a lullaby, a comedian delivering a punchline that resonated with 1,000 lifetimes of shared understanding. He experienced betrayal, loyalty, despair, and irrational, indomitable hope, all within the span of a few Earth minutes. On the bridge of the Iron Will, Gruel watched Zorg's biosigns on his monitor. The technician was convulsing, his armored limbs flailing. "What is happening?" Gruel snarled. "Is the human data fighting back?" "Unknown, Commander," another technician stammered. "His neural pathways are overloaded. He's receiving, it's not structured data, it's like a million voices shouting different realities." Zorg ripped the interface cable from his skull, a shriek tearing from his throat, a sound no Vorkath had ever been recorded making. He stumbled back, eyes wide with a terror that had nothing to do with physical threat. "The stories," he gasped, they show you. They make you feel what they felt. It's chaos, it's understanding." Gruel was furious. "Understanding what, you imbecile? Pull yourself together, find something useful." But it was too late for Zorg. His mind, exposed to the raw, concentrated power of human narrative empathy, had fractured. But not in the way the silence fractured minds. He wasn't paranoid or aggressive. He was confused, yes, but also strangely reflective. Other Vorkath technicians, believing Zorg had encountered a human defense program, tried to erect firewalls to filter the data. But human stories weren't like computer viruses. They didn't attack systems. They engaged minds. The Vorkath, in their attempt to weaponize the archive, had inadvertently exposed their own personnel to its full, unfiltered force. One by one, Vorkath soldiers and technicians who interfaced directly or were in close proximity to active data streams began to exhibit unusual behaviors. A hardened warrior, known for his ruthless efficiency, was found weeping silently after accessing a child's fairy tale about loss and reunion. Another, tasked with analyzing human military histories for tactical weaknesses, became obsessed with the concept of a Pyrrhic victory, questioning the very nature of Vorkath conquest. They weren't becoming human, but their rigid Vorkath worldview was being eroded by the sheer, overwhelming tide of human perspectives, the endless what-ifs and why-nots embedded in our narratives. The silence was still out there, a signal of pure, refined entropy. But what the Vorkath were experiencing from the human archive was different. It was a tsunami of meaning, albeit often contradictory and emotionally charged, and it began to act as an unintentional counteragent to the silence. The silence worked by isolating thought, by making the universe seem hostile and incomprehensible. Human stories, in all their chaotic glory, did the opposite. They were about connection, about shared experience, about finding patterns and meaning even in suffering. They were filled with characters overcoming fear, communities banding together, individuals finding solace in shared grief or joy. These narratives, designed to help humans understand themselves and their world, were now inadvertently providing cognitive frameworks to resist the mental decay caused by the silence. Captain Rostova and her crew, initially prisoners, began to notice the change. Their Vorkath guards became less aggressive, more hesitant. Some even attempted awkward, stilted conversations, asking about the stories they had accidentally glimpsed. One young Vorkath guard, whose helmet calm had picked up fragments of an old Earth detective noir story while his superiors were trying to analyze it, approached Rostova. "This Deckard human," he stammered. "He pursued the truth, even when it was painful, even when he was alone. Why?" Rostova, seizing the opportunity, explained. She talked about human curiosity, about the drive to understand, about finding meaning in the struggle, not just the victory. She didn't preach, she just shared more stories. Word of what was happening on the Namasni eventually reached what remained of the struggling conquered command. Most were too paralyzed by the silence to act. But one admiral, a Zalarian named Lyravas, whose species was particularly vulnerable to the signal's discord, registered the anomaly. Human space, while not immune, was reporting slightly lower incidences of full societal breakdown. And now, this report of Vorkath soldiers being pacified. Confused into inaction by a human archive ship, it was illogical, it was hopeful. Lyravas took a desperate gamble. She ordered a small, still functional fleet to investigate the Namasini, not to rescue it, but to understand what was happening. When the conquered ships arrived, they found a bizarre scene. The Vorkath flagship Iron Will was still there, but its command structure was in disarray. Gruul was isolated on his bridge, ranting about mine poisons and emotional contamination, but his orders were confused and contradictory. Many of his crew were either incapacitated by confusion or actively engaged in listening. Human crew members, under Rostova's direction, were broadcasting curated selections from the archive, not as a weapon, but as a shield. They were playing music that evoked courage, telling stories of resilience, showing films about unity in the face of overwhelming odds. Conquered rescue team, their own minds frayed by the silence, found themselves exposed to the same barrage. And for many, it was like a light in the darkness. The human narratives didn't magically cure them, but they offered handholds, patterns of thought that ran counter to the despair and paranoia of the silence. Stories of heroes who fought on despite fear, of communities that rebuilt from ashes, of love that endured loss. These weren't logical arguments, but they were powerful emotional and cognitive anchors. Lyra Voss, monitoring the situation from her flagship, realized what was happening. Human art, human storytelling, was not a frivolous pastime. It was a deeply evolved psychological toolkit, a mimetic immune system forged over millennia of human experience with their own internal and external conflicts. It was a way of processing complexity, of maintaining empathy, of resisting cognitive breakdown. The silence was a signal of pure anti-meaning. Human stories were an avalanche of constructed meaning. The Vorkath Ascendancy's attempt to seize the Namasini and weaponize its contents had backfired spectacularly. They hadn't just failed to find a weapon. They had inadvertently unleashed the cure, or at least, the most effective treatment yet found, for the silence, and in doing so, had crippled their own invasion force from within. Gruul was eventually sedated by his own increasingly bewildered medical staff, who had started listening to human medical dramas about ethical dilemmas and found them compelling. In the aftermath, the Galactic Conquered underwent a profound re-evaluation. The Namasini, once a symbol of human quaintness, became a beacon. Its archives were carefully studied, not by military tacticians, but by psychologists, sociologists, and philosophers from across the galaxy. Human artists, writers, musicians, and even comedians suddenly found themselves in very high demand. They were invited to share their techniques, Their ways of framing reality, of processing trauma through narrative, of fostering empathy through character. Special narrative therapy centers, based on human storytelling principles, were established across conquered space to help species recover from the lingering effects of the silence. The human ability to create and share complex emotional narratives was no longer seen as a charming quirk, but as a vital, powerful, and perhaps unique galactic resource. The saying, "never underestimate a species that tells itself stories," became a common adage in the corridors of galactic power. Human diplomats, once considered a bit over-enthusiastic, now found their colleagues listening with rapt attention, not just to their policy proposals, but to the anecdotes and allegories they used to illustrate their points. Humanity didn't suddenly become the most powerful military force or the wealthiest economic power, but they became something arguably more important. The galaxy's storytellers, its therapists, its cognitive guardians. They taught the ancient, weary galaxy that sometimes the most powerful weapons against the darkness are not made of metal and energy, but of words, of images, of shared dreams and invented sorrows, of the endlessly resilient, chaotically beautiful, and utterly essential human art of the story. The conquered learned that a species that invests so much in understanding its own heart might just hold the key to understanding everyone else's. And in a galaxy threatened by the unraveling of minds, that was the greatest power of all.